don't make the time horizon so big that it's going to seem so complex. You're not going to do it. Get 100% confidence yourself. Get the right person that will help you on the strategy. Develop the plan, and then just don't think about it. Just execute.
Wow, it's awesome. Confidence and execution go a long way.
Welcome to another episode of The Financially Free Investor, where you will learn information and strategies on how to become financially independent by investing in real estate, something that is not taught openly in our society today. Financial freedom matters so you can live a bigger life, retire early, and do what matters most to you. Get ready to hear tried and true methods to becoming financially free with your host, Jordy Clark.
All right, everyone, welcome into another episode of The Financially Free Investor. Recording this here with Matt Cavanagh.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude, it's been a fun journey getting to know you. And actually, for everyone listening, I met Matt in Park City at a GoBundance event. And then we kind of stayed in touch. And then I was a guest on his podcast. And I was listening to another podcast that he was on telling his story. And I was like, oh, this is a great story. And I just want to hear it again selfishly. So here we go. We've got you on, man. Good to have you on.
Thank you. So my story starts as a math teacher. I got my degree in math. And the moment that I like sharing is the moment that I was sitting on a couch with my wife and we were having a financial discussion. We had to have these a lot because we didn't have very much money. And we didn't have much money because I was a math teacher making $25,000 a year. The contract I had was a little bit more than that, but by the time we paid our taxes and the insurance plan we had to have, we were making about $25,000 a year. And so what that meant, because we had a daughter and my wife stayed at home, was that we had to decide between running the air conditioning on a given month or going out for Little Caesars pizza. And so this discussion was happening. It was getting a little bit tense and heated. And I just thought to myself, my goodness, I don't want to be sitting here 5 years from now deciding whether or not I can go out for a meal on Friday or, if I can run the AC. When as a teacher, anybody who's been a teacher knows, you work long days. You teach from 7 or 8 in the morning till 3 or 4 in the afternoon. You got lesson plans, you got grading. These could be 12-hour days. These could be 16-hour days. And to make that kind of money just felt wrong. And so there was kind of a festering and growing inside of me hey, what happens if I went into a place in the world where I could still teach people, but I was actually valued a little bit closer to what I was worth? And so as a result, that led to a series of conversations, which led me into a sales job and then essentially led me into real estate. And so my first exposure to real estate was tied to the investing space. Feel free to hop in if you want. But
yeah, actually, I got a couple questions before we jump in too much further to your life and your history. What made you want to be a school teacher?
So I grew up heavily involved in ministry. So my dad in particular was very, very active. And so we kind of grew up in a family and a culture that life's about service. And, so I felt most fulfilled when I was serving. And so achieving is part of my DNA as well. But I knew to be fully happy and feel complete, I needed to be giving to others. And so with growing up in a family that was wildly competitive, we'd play Monopoly, I was very numbers oriented, but always knew somehow I got to be in service of other people. So teaching seemed to make the most sense.
Okay. So you're growing up, you're playing Monopoly, you're doing a bunch of stuff. You say, hey, I want to be a teacher because it's a way I can give back and serve. Right. And I think everyone knows teachers aren't compensated very well, right? At least in the formal education school system. We can get into other stuff, which we probably will later, just on how you can achieve the same thing and just actually be compensated for it. And
right.
I've always thought it's interesting that our public school systems, we value NBA players more than we value teachers that are teaching our kids, right? And I didn't think much about it before, but now that I have a 7-year-old that's in the public school system, it actually means a lot more to me now, and I don't scoff at property taxes. Anyways, so that's what drew you to becoming a school teacher. How much school did you have to go through, and what was that process like? At what point did you get married and have a kid?
Yeah. So I went to college. I graduated at 17 and I had 4 years to get my math degree and 1 year to do my credential. So I got married my junior year in high school. I met my wife my sophomore year and knew within 3 to 6 months that this is the direction I wanted to go. So we've mapped out a financial plan to get married in college. So we both did some side hustles while we were going to school to make ends meet. So I was married at 20. And then from there, I did in California at the time, you could do your credential program and teach. So my first year of teaching, I was doing 18 units of school, teaching full time, and then the credential program. And then we had our daughter 3 days after my first teaching assignment. So it was pretty wild those years. And you were mentioning something about the school system being undervaluing teachers. Like for me, oddly enough, at that point in my life, that was actually like a plus. Because I grew up like a person of faith, like I just felt like what we were being taught was, hey, like being poor is almost like a badge of honor. It's like, how much will you sacrifice for people and not be paid? It was like, it would be more noble to not collect resources than it was too. So like that part actually resonated with me until it didn't. But yeah.
So interesting, that mentality. Because in the church I'm a part of, I think there's a vein of that too, right? Where, I mean, the Bible even says it, right? Like it's tougher for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than have a camel pass through the eye of a needle, or eye of a needle.
You got it.
So like, anyways, it's interesting just to think about that. Like I personally believe that like money doesn't really mean anything. Like who you are as a person is way more important than money. At the same sense of it, like if I have one of two options and option A is have no money and struggle, and option B is have a lot of money but still struggle, like money makes some stuff way easier. Like worrying about paying your air conditioning. If you have money, that's not a concern, right? You focus on other things, how to make an impact. And so anyways, cool. So you were doing a ton, you had your first daughter, start getting going in school. How long were you teaching as a math teacher?
So I taught for 2 years.
Okay.
And so I had switched schools in the later part of the second year just to give a different school district a try. And it became evident that this was not where I wanted to be. And I always assumed to some degree I'd probably come back to teaching because it wasn't the teaching that I didn't like. It was just the combination of the pay and the oversight. We gone to school 4 years to get a degree and then got a credential. I thought they're just going to trust me to teach the way that I think is best for these kids, but it didn't quite go that way. It was very structured. This is the lesson, you teach it this way at this time. And I thought, like, I just want to be in a place where I could teach the way that lights me up and the way that I think the students will learn. So I just assumed, hey, I'm going to go make some money and then I'll come back. But then as I discovered, you could teach things in the real world and help people who actually want to be there. Like our students were forced to be there. I get to teach people now that pay me to be there. It's a wildly different thing to get somebody that's like, hey, I want to learn from you. I'm willing to pay you. And then a lot of times they end up doing what you say and they get some great results.
Yeah. That's interesting too, because like I always wondered growing up and being in middle and high school and college, well, college less so, but like in high school, I'm like, why am I taking all these classes? Like, I don't want to do any of this. Right. And it's just interesting that it's like, no, this is what you have to do, almost like a dictatorship. Right. And then like, even just thinking about my daughter, we went to dinner with a couple friends in our neighborhood last week, and they're talking about, oh yeah, we've got this kid in this sport and this kid in this sport and this kid in this sport. And they've been doing it for this many years. And like, they're running around crazy. And I'm over here like, man, I'm glad that's not my life, because my daughter tries something and if she doesn't like it, like I don't want to keep paying for it and I don't want her to keep doing it. So I'm not going to force it. Like she'll figure it out if she likes it or not. Right. And I kind of just wish that life was a little bit more easygoing, like that. So anyways, keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I could totally relate to that because we have friends too that they do a lot of traveling sports and a lot of things of that nature. And it's interesting too, because I always wonder, like, how valuable is that really? I played traveling sports growing up, and I think there was some value to it, but the loss of all the weekends, the loss of all those times that maybe other things could have been learned. So I can resonate with you on that. Yeah. So basically I started, after I left teaching and the sales job, I started doing some investing. And so that really opened my eyes to the fact that like I can really make it in this world, not having to work at corporate, because that was a big jump from like, can I make it outside of teaching? And then can I make it outside of someone giving me a paycheck? And once that became real, like self-employment was a real thing, that like wildly opened the doors. And so that led me to be an agent I'm still an agent today, but I was really focused on being an agent for at least the first 3 or 4 years to get that team going and to really build some good income. But it wasn't until 2018 where my buddy of mine really, really encouraged me to get back in investing. And from there, it was only 5 transactions from the time that I started investing to where I had enough rental income that I got to choose whether or not I worked. And so that's one of my big passion points now of teaching people is the strategy that you use matters. You could have a strategy where you have to do 1,000 things to get to where you want to go, or you could have a strategy that you could do 1 or 2 things or 5 things to get you where you want to go. And so that's really what I hope to do on, being on your podcast and these different podcasts is hopefully inspire people to shortcut the process by a factor of 10 or 100.
Yeah. So you went from being a math teacher, then you went to B2B sales, then you went to being an investor, then an agent, and now you're kind of back in investing. And, what you've done is pretty phenomenal. What have you accumulated rental wise, and what does that net you? And I want to take that and then jump back into your story. And I think there's probably a few key pivotal moments that I want to chat about.
Yeah. So we own 3 single family houses in the outskirts of Chicago that are rent by the room. So the contract rents on those are $11,300. And then we have a single family in Ohio, which we are getting ready to sell. So I'll exclude that one. We have a 38 space mobile home park in Oklahoma that is, we don't own the homes. We just own the spaces. So those rent out between $150 and $200 a month. And then I have a property that I'm shooting this video in that has the 3 rentals in the front take care of the expenses of the entire property so that I get to use this 1,800 square foot shop garage for video, podcast, etc. And then we just closed on a cabin about 3 hours from our house that we can go to an Airbnb. So the mobile home park is being stabilized, but we generate about $2,500 a month from that now, and it's about half full. And then we anticipate about $3,000 to $4,000 from this Airbnb that we've closed on that we're getting ready to renovate. And so that makes up the portfolio.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome to go in 4 years, essentially, right? 18 to 22, to accumulate that much. So before we dive into your portfolio and why you've chosen those assets, because I think it's interesting, let's chat about being a math teacher and that moment when you realize like something's got to give. How did you and your wife work through that and still stay married? Because I think that's a big struggle a lot of people have is they'll get in these financial arguments and then, it seems to just compound other stuff going on in marriages. And then all of a sudden, like our divorce rate in America is like 60%, right? Like,
yeah.
And as a believer myself, right, I'm like, man, this shouldn't be this high. Like, I think, there's definitely cases where it would make sense for a divorce, but I think most of the time, like, it's just people just give up, right? So how did you guys work through that? And then, mentally, maybe walk me through what that was like leaving, what is considered the most stable job as being a school teacher.
Yeah, there were several issues that my wife had with the transition. So one was, I guess the stability of income was fine at my sales job because I was paid at a base. So that wasn't a problem there. She actually had a little bit more struggle when I became an agent and there was no guaranteed income. But as far as the challenge, she saw what I was doing as a teacher as being a completely noble profession. And she saw sales, the only salespeople she was ever introduced to, like, were slimy, like exactly. They'll sell you on something you don't need. They're pushy. And she's like, okay, Matt, like you're this earnest, sincere, you do not have a smooth tongue. And at that point I had no sales training. So like any level of speaking talent I might have today is not a result of what I was that point. And so she's like, this is not you. And so you're basically, more or less, without being mean, she was like, you're going to fail. And I don't even like the image if you were making the transition. And so that became an interesting conversation because we're like, look, I was like, babe, I'd make more working at McDonald's. And so like, I mean, my nobility has a price point. Like, you know, like I could take the sales job right now. And if it doesn't work out, I can go get another teaching job or go get something else, but I need to do something. And this is kind of the avenue that we have. So like, it was definitely like a little bit tense, but we were never, ever worried about like our relationship. I think one of the things that we did early before we got married was we just told each other like, this is forever. And we meant it. And it's like, it doesn't matter how ugly this gets. Like, and this might be a little bit too much information, but like from the very beginning, like she's told me like, hey, if you were to even have an affair on me, I'd stay married to you. And that's like an interesting piece of information to try and absorb, right? We have both stayed, as to my knowledge, we both stayed 100% faithful. You know I have. And so there's this element of trust that we were, and on the first of the month, we'll be married for 15 years. And so like, it's we never, like anytime we got into any sort of disagreement or it was never a question about like if it would end or not. So, and then like I'm sure you and your wife have done, like we've been very intentional about the time that we spend together and, you know, how we're building the relationship. Like a business, we also do a lot of future planning. So I'll ask myself probably once a month, like if we carried our marriage on the exact course it's on today, in 15 or 20 years, would we be happy with the result? And so it's not just planning around the arguments that we may or may not have. It's like, is the current course good or bad? And then making adjustments. So,
man, I want everyone to rewind that 15 seconds and listen to that, because I think too often people do the opposite of that, where they don't, do the whole Stephen Covey plan with the end in mind. And forecast out and be like, hey, in 15 years or at the end of my life, am I going to be happy with who I'm becoming? And, there's one thing I've always really resonated with. I heard Ed Milet say it, and he said, when he gets to the end of his life, he believes that he's going to make his creator, which I believe the same thing. Actually, I believe all of this. So I'm just going to say it like Ed said it. He's going to be given the opportunity to stand in front of the man he could have become. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he is going to either be happy or sad based on if he is a mirror image of that person or not. Right. So in his mind, he has this ideal he's striving for. And again, no one's perfect, but if he doesn't, he thinks he's going to have the opportunity to meet that person. And I really resonated with that. And, a lot of how I make my decisions is based off of a similar decision making where I'm like, obviously there's needs that need to be taken care of right now, but every property we buy, for the most part, I go, okay, am I going to be okay holding on to this, for 15 years, for 10 years? Kind of what's my strategy there? And well, it's easy to do that with properties or investments. It's a lot harder just because it's not tangible to do that with your most important relationship, with your wife, with your kids, with your friends, right? And more importantly, like with yourself, because of who you become. And, a lot of people, if you don't have money, you want money. But then all of a sudden, if you get money, you haven't changed. It's just, you have a few more zeros in the bank account, right? So if you're a jerk without money, you're going to be a bigger jerk with money. But if you're giving and charitable and without money, when you get money, you will give and be charitable and help. And I think too many people focus on the more tangible stuff, like, money in the bank account, rental properties, number of whatevers, and versus like the intangible stuff, like who am I becoming? Or, if I take this job, who will I become in the next 5 years at this job? right? I think that's more of an important question to ask, and one that I hope, my kids and your kids and everyone's kids in GoBundance and everyone who's listening to this podcast starts asking themselves, because the money doesn't matter. Like when you die, they're not going to be like, he died with this many zeros in his bank account. Like, bravo, right? Your eulogy is going to say something completely unrelated. It's going to say who you are as a person. So, all of this financial freedom that we talk about, passive income and growing our wealth, and like, it's all great, but who it makes of you to achieve this, I think, is more interesting, which is kind of why I'm diving in and taking probably a different route than most other podcasts that you've been on. Because I think that success leaves clues. And if people can figure out areas in their life that they can tweak, well, they're eventually going to achieve what they want to achieve if they become somebody that is, capable of having a 38-home mobile home park, or, $11,300 a month in rental income. Like, that is just a byproduct of who you are and your journey, in my opinion. So congrats, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah. And I love what you're saying. I mean, like, the who you're going to become is so valuable. And like, I've gone through some struggles over the last couple of years that kind of have really highlighted this in my mind. Like, there's a lot of things that you can accomplish by doing, just by straight doing. Like, you can go sell a certain number of houses, or you could buy a certain number of rental properties. But like, let's say you take your physical health, like, that's a hard thing to do. Like, even if you lose the weight, you usually gain it back if you're not the person that's going to keep you there. Like, being a wealthy person is an act of being. Being a healthy person is an act of being, and not doing. So
to maybe deconstruct that a little bit, and what are you doing in your life to be more instead of do more?
Yeah. So like, a lot of times you can learn principles through the struggle of not abiding by those principles. So like, in my health, I've lost 40 or 50 pounds, like literally 4 or 5 times. So I am very good at losing weight. I have just been very bad at maintaining weight. And it's become very, very apparent to me that like, the process of maintaining weight is more of a process of being, because like, it's about doing the same things every single day, which is not something that I really enjoy. Generally speaking, I'd rather do something new, have a new experience, so on and so forth. So in the process of becoming, it's been a routine that I've had to develop, like in the morning, like what I say to myself, and then what that leads to. So over the last like couple months, like, I've had like darn near perfection, maybe even could call it perfection, in the way that I've eaten, because I've constantly reiterated to myself, like I have to find a process that I love. It's not like, because usually like when people think about taking action, it's like, I'm willing to grind out what I don't love. And so that leads, like, how long are you going to do something that you don't love? Like me, I'm not going to do it forever, but it's like, if I can fall in love with a healthy process, I can fall in love with the mindsets that then I essentially could become the person that could do that forever.
Yeah. That's interesting. I love talking about health and fitness, because like, I think the principles are the same, right? Like, so even just thinking financially, going back to your fitness comment, eating is more important to maintaining than working out a ton, right? Which you hit on. But you got to find what works for you. And I think the same could be said in finances, right? Like, just because one person, on YouTube or wherever says like, this is what you need to do. Well, if you try it and hate it, like, maybe that's not what you need to do. Maybe that's what somebody else needs to do. And maybe you need to figure out a different way that's going to work for you, versus just like trying to grind it out, because that only lasts so long. So yeah, that's interesting to think about. You got my wheels turning now.
Yeah, I'll give you some examples in this to like maybe illustrate like the thinking process. So for me, it was like, there's certain people that could just snap their fingers and go like, I'm just going to eat this every single day, and they're good. Like, I don't know how those people function, but they're not me. And so like, it was just a constant iteration of like, okay, I failed today. what thought processes did I have right before I failed? How did my day start? So it was starting to take journal notes of like, okay, here's how my day started. Here's generally how my day progressed. Here was the point before failure. And then I failed. And the more I documented, the more I started becoming aware of the failure right before it happened. But I still couldn't stop it a lot of the times, which was really insane to me because it's like I didn't have enough willpower. But then it started to become clear as I documented, generally speaking, it was a stress response. And when I felt stress, then it was like, okay, the outcome of the eating was going to be a problem. So then it was like, okay, well, what non-eating ways can I relieve stress? And then it was like, well, lifting, running, doing some sort of sporting activity. For me, it might be different for somebody else, was one of the best ways. Yeah. So I put a gym in the garage. And so here in the office, I go through the gym to get home. And then so it's like I check myself now and it's like, hey, am I experiencing any level of stress like in today? And check. And if I do, it's like, okay, I need to pump out, 10 bench press reps or whatever it is until the stress is no longer there. Then I can go home and know that I'm not going to like look for the desserts in the freezer.
Yeah. That's really good. So let's chat about going from an investor to an agent to back to your focus as an investor. What did you start investing in? Obviously, we kind of know what your portfolio is now, but then why did you start there? Yeah.
So my mother-in-law wanted to invest in real estate, and I was excited to learn. And she was getting ready to go to one of those conferences that were notorious for asking you to raise your credit card limit and spend a lot of money. So I was trying to protect her from spending that money. And so we went to it, and they gave some pretty good ideas, but it wasn't like you couldn't get those ideas on the internet. So they were teaching about tax default sales. And so at the time, those weren't super competitive. And we would work with mailers and other ways of getting these people to call us before the auction. And so the first deal that I helped her work on was a deal we got a call at 9 a.m. Went out there. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. And we had to negotiate that deal from 9 a.m. We had to close on it at 4:30. Otherwise, it went to auction the next day. So you had to do all your due diligence, all your checking. And I wasn't some real estate expert at this point. So this was, it was interesting. There was a lot of adrenaline pumping. The veins were just flowing with it. So we get to this house, and it was just like filled with like t-shirts, rats, needles, like anything you could imagine. And there was 3 girls there that, looked like they were in pretty bad shape. And so we asked them like, hey, what do you want for this thing? And one of the girls answered, hey, we'll take $3,000. And I'm like, $3,000? Like, that's what you want? And she's like, yeah. So they all agreed. They each wanted $3,000. So we looked at the tax records, and the tax record showed that it was in a trust. So we got the trust records from them and found out mom had a life estate and there was an executor. So we contacted them. They each wanted $3,000. Well, the executor lived in Reno, and that's like 3.5 hours from us. So we got the documents to him. He got notarized and drove back and got to us by about 4 p.m. So we paid the $15,000. We paid the back taxes. We're into this property for like $35,000 when we closed. And so we got insurance on it. A couple weeks later, we had it cleaned out, and then someone snuck in, some probably drug addict snuck in and did some drugs and burnt a portion of the property down. So this is like my exposure. And so originally it was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But after negotiating with the insurance, the payout was like $38,000. So basically, and do it for $0. And then it sold on the MLS a few days later for $85,000. So I was looking at that amount going, oh my gosh, like that's $85,000. Like that's not far off from what I'm making a year at the sales job. And so that was one of the big, like, I can do this. And then we later bought a duplex for $21,000 in California. And so that was enough for me to leave my job. But quickly, those things became more competitive. Way less of them started to hit the lists. And so I was a little bit nervous of relying on that as income. So that's when I decided to be an agent instead of an investor, which was a big mistake. Like I should have been an investor all the way.
Yeah. What year was that?
2000. That was like 13, 14, probably maybe 14, 15.
Okay. It's interesting. Your story is similar to mine. Like I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, wanted to become an investor. And I was like, oh, I'm going to save 3% because I'm a relatively frugal person. I'm going to save 3% on all my rental property purchases and be my own agent, right? And then I got sucked into being an agent, helping other investors, and I wasn't investing. Like, I wasn't taking my own medicine, if you will. So why do you say you should have continued to be an investor?
Well, okay, so you look at being an agent, and you're going to make somewhere between maybe an $8,000 and $12,000 commission per deal on average. There'll be some deals you'll do way more, some deals you'll do less. And so you think about it, the amount of work to do a deal, being an agent, guiding someone through the process, is probably more than the work you do to guide yourself through the process. And so the workloads are similar. Now, you got a lot more work to find a deal, I would think, as an investor than you do as an agent, because it's hard to find a great deal comparatively from a time, but it's not like it's that different. Especially now, like, agents bring me deals. So I don't even do the work of finding the deal anymore. And so when you look at it from a work perspective, it's relatively similar. You just have the money risk. Well, now I have the knowledge of knowing that you don't have to put out any of your own money to buy these deals. There's so many ways you could buy them creatively or using private money. And let's say you're sharing 50% of the profits with somebody to get the money. You just do twice as many and you get the same outcome. And so it became very, very apparent later that, wow, had I had those tools, I just wouldn't have thought about it in the same way. And so to see how my net worth grew as an agent, doing over 100 transactions most years, to now I'm doing 5 transactions, or, roughly that amount, to go from like 0 to where I could basically retire. It was like, it's just no contest. From net worth growth to cash flow, I mean, it was 10 to 100 times more valuable per deal to be an investor than to be an agent.
That's one thing I've never understood, why more agents don't invest. Like, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, dude, it's crazy because we have a small team, and like, my dad is an amazing human being. Like, he raised me well, love him. He's on my team. I got to bring him onto the real estate team in 2016. For the last 4 or 5 years, I've been telling him as often as I can, without trying to really make him mad, like, Dad, you have to invest. But it's just like, there's something in his psychology that seems to be present in a lot of agent psychology, which is like, this is a more sure path. This seems, safer. I kind of had that for a little while, and it seems like they're so like set on, I got to go get the money, I got to do this, that they're unwilling to learn the creative aspects, which unlock everything.
That's interesting, that the comment of most agents stay agents because it's more of a sure thing, right? Like, it makes me ask myself the question of, like, where are you holding yourself back because of perceived security?
Right. Yeah, that's such a real thing. Like, so my sales manager, who I love, I still talk to this day at my B2B sales job, he literally just got laid off. Best sales manager I've met in the country. Maybe there's better out there. I wouldn't know, because this guy was so awesome. And so it's like, it's interesting because I always view what I was doing as being the more risky thing. And yet in these new wave of layoffs in the recession, people are getting wiped out. And so a lot of time, perceived risk is really just perceived. It's not even more risky.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Perceived risk is not really that risky. Yeah, for sure. So now you've been an agent for almost a decade, grinding it out, selling a ton of homes. You obviously started buying some more rentals back in 2018. That's when you started back up again.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because that's like the same year I kind of started laying myself into a lot more investment properties, and
love it.
I'm super excited for whatever this market in 2024 is going to bring, because like, I actually have a few nickels to rub together now, and like, I have the knowledge, and I'm like, man, this is going to be good.
Yeah. Talking to guys that were in our position or even a little better, let's say in the 2008 market, that built $10, $50 million portfolios because they bought everything in the crash. And I don't know that we're going to crash to the same degree that we did on prices then. Like, in our area, we saw about a 50% price reduction. And so, but to think like, if things go half off, between gathering some private money partners and doing creative and using some of the nickels that we have, like, it's crazy. Can we buy 50 homes? Can we buy 100 homes and just wait for 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, that's the goal, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's just crazy. Like knowledge is so valuable. Strategic knowledge, particularly, like to think, it's just so weird. Like thinking back to being a teacher and it was like, dude, I'm just trying to scratch the surface to put food on the table. And it's like, I'm the same person, you could argue. Like I what I would say, consider to be the same character that I had, back in 2009, but it's just like, I'm just working on a different problem. And not even a harder problem. Like solving the problem of buying investments is not harder than teaching 36 students in a classroom. It's just a problem that society values at a much different level.
Yeah. So I want to be sensitive to your time. I know we're kind of running up on the end of what we have booked. I love your journey, man. I mean, going from a math teacher making 25 grand a year to, I mean, we didn't even cover some stuff in the B2B that you and I chatted about before, but just like, you had learning opportunities there and now here you are a decade-ish later and, you own a fair amount of properties. You've got good income coming in from rentals. And I'm excited to see what the next decade looks like for you. Because I think too often, if anyone's out there listening and they're just getting started, you're probably sitting there going, gosh, I'd never have Jordy's portfolio or Matt's portfolio. And, I could never own a property that, 38 mobile home park, like 38 space mobile home park. So it seems really daunting, but I mean, if you look at it, like this didn't happen overnight for you. It happened over a decade and it's been cool. So I frame all of that so that I can ask my question. What's the one thing you'd want to tell someone who is just getting started or who's working on, moving towards financial freedom?
Yeah. I'll share a story here. So people oftentimes make decisions based on time. And I want to throw time out the window for the purpose of this answer. So when I was 19 years old, one of my best friends, still my best friend, he told me, now it was easier for him to say it than for me because that dude was making good money. He was on the power line. So he was making 130, 150K a year. I was making about nothing. And so he looked at me and he said, by 35, we will both be financially free. And he was so convinced of this that the conviction with which he spoke, like it hit me like right in my chest. And I was like, okay, like I don't have any clue of how this will happen. No thought of it, but like it was so deep it resonated. And sure enough, like I'm 35 and it happened. And like he's not surprised by it. I'm just like unbelievably surprised that at that age he was able to declare it. So I think thing number one is conviction. So like what I learned in sales and B2B sales is that if you want to make a sale, you're transferring your utter and absolute belief in something to somebody else. Like that's ultimately what's happening. There's all kinds of things you can learn, like how to talk, how to persuade. But the greatest persuasion mechanism ever, in my opinion, is confidence. And so if you are going to be the persuader of yourself, like you have to have an unshakable confidence that the destination that you're shooting for is something that you're going to hit. And if you can't put that into yourself, you need to go find someone. I'm happy to be this person. Jordy, I'm sure you're happy to be this person for some of your listeners. I'm happy to look you in the face and say, like, you're going to get there. But that's number one, is it's an absolute belief that you belong, that you should be there. Without that, you're going to find all sorts of reasons to self-sabotage and destroy your success. The second thing I'd like to talk about in regards to time is that time is completely irrelevant. It was the utter belief and confidence matched with the appropriate level of strategy and knowledge. I don't think that I grew so fast from 2018 to 2023 because I was just on year 5 of my journey. I grew so much from 2018 to 2023 because I started doing the things that led to that kind of success. And somebody could start today and literally within 1 to 2 years, they could be financially free. Like I took a bus driver this year who trusted me. And I told him, look, you will be financially free in the next 3 years. because you're willing to sell your house, take the equity and invest it. You're willing to put yourself in a difficult situation for a couple of years where you have to rent again to invest. And so he's been buying properties at $50,000 a clip that net him $1,000 a month. And then refi out, do the BRRRR strategy, have the equity, have tons of, so he doesn't, fortunately for him, he doesn't have to replace a lot of income because he was driving bus, but he will be financially free in less than 2 years. And so that's what I would say is that, like, don't make the time horizon so big that it's going to seem so complex. You're not going to do it. Get 100% confidence yourself. Get the right person that will help you on the strategy, develop the plan, and then just don't think about it. Just execute.
Wow. It's awesome. Confidence and execution go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently on your journey?
Yeah, there are several things I think I would have done differently. I think every time that I made a decision to do something for the sake of increasing revenue versus I would have chosen a different path, I would have focused on choosing something that increased my energy. I would have focused significantly more on passion increase as opposed to, I think I asked myself way too many times, what's the best financial path? Like what lead source can I pursue that will give me the most returns? Instead of what lead source can I pursue that fits who I am the best. So I think alignment for sure. And I think I got too married to the fact that the grind is good, as opposed to the fact that, like, you look at Jeff Bezos and all of these people that are successful, they make a couple of good decisions a day and that sustains. And so I think the grind is the antithesis to good decision-making oftentimes, because you're making a decision from being stressed, which leads to chasing squirrels. And so if I had to do it over again, I would be way more narrow, way more focused on something that I'm passionate about so that I could be in a really positive, energetic state of mind all day and make great decisions. And then I think that alone compounds your time as far as getting to where you want to go.
Oh man, I needed that.
Thanks, brother. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think it's important to realize that. Like, I love that you would have done that differently, and I hope that you can use that own advice in the future. I know I'm certainly going to take that advice, because it's true, man. Like, there's stuff that I do that's like sucks the freaking life out of me, and then, like, it's just, life is miserable when those things happen and you're less productive. Like, you have to grind it out versus, like, you just find something you like and it resonates, and, like, like a lead source that resonates with you. Like, you don't have to close every deal on earth. You just have to close a select few to get you a certain income, that allows you a nice lifestyle and a bunch of money left over to invest. Like, that's kind of the formula I'm hearing you say. So,
well, and I got examples of this. You shared examples that resonated with me when you were on our podcast. You had mentioned giving up the relationship with the builder because even though it brought a lot of security, a lot of revenue, it just didn't make sense because it wasn't leading you to where you want to go. Even me doing this podcast, and maybe for you too, like, this is a labor of love. Like, yes, at some point we expect some returns from this. But as you know, most podcasters lose money in the production costs, the time, for 6 months to maybe 3 to 5 to 10 years before they really ever get the returns. And so this podcast even is a departure from, like, I could for sure go spend my time trying to find more deals or trying to be an agent. But instead, I'm taking way less money to do a podcast because it's where the energy is.
Yeah. So good. Well, Matt, I want to be sensitive to your time. Where can people find out more about you? I'm so, like, just
same, brother.
Blown away from your answers that I can't think. Where can people find out more about you, and how can they get in touch with you if they want?
Yeah, so we're the Freedom Chasers podcast. So if they search Freedom Chasers podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, that's great. I can send you my link tree. My link tree will get them the same places, or if they want to submit a deal to us to review, to help fund, or to buy, or anything like that, they could do that there. But Freedom Chasers podcast on any of the platforms.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, brother, I've enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed getting to know you more, and hopefully I'll see you at a GoBendance event soon.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, man. See ya.
Catch you later.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of The Financially Free Investor. If you found value in this episode or know someone who would find value in this information, please share with them, subscribe, and send us a review.